On a chilly winter afternoon, the doorbell of a high-end jewelry store rang as a disheveled, elderly man named Samuel stumbled in. The store's polished floors and sparkling displays clashed starkly with his worn-out clothes and tired eyes. The young sales assistant, Lisa, frowned as she watched him approach the counter, clearly judging him by his appearance. She assumed he had wandered into the wrong place, or maybe sought shelter from the cold. Her cold, dismissive tone cut through the air as she asked, "Sir, are you sure you belong here?" Samuel paused for a moment, his eyes catching the warm glow of the diamond-studded necklaces and shimmering rings. The stark contrast between his tattered coat and the glistening jewelry around him only amplified the tension in the air. Lisa's eyes followed his every movement, her polished, manicured fingers tapping impatiently on the glass display as she prepared to shoo him away. Despite the harsh reception, Samuel shuffled closer, his weathered shoes squeaking slightly against the pristine marble floor. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling beneath layers of patched fabric. His voice, though tired and rough from years on the streets, held a quiet dignity as he said, "Excuse me, miss. I need to speak to Mr. Davis." Lisa's perfectly painted eyebrows shot up, her lips curling into a skeptical smirk. She glanced over at her colleague, subtly exchanging a look that spoke volumes. To her, this man was nothing more than a nuisance, an unwanted interruption in her otherwise flawless workday. She folded her arms, her sharp, silver bracelet clinking against the glass. "Mr. Davis is a busy man," she replied, her voice laced with condescension. "And this is a luxury store. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Samuel's frail shoulders sagged slightly, but he didn't back down. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his worn-out overcoat, pulling out a crumpled, yellowing piece of paper. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Revealing a carefully preserved letter, the ink faded but the words still clear. He held it out to Lisa, his eyes soft yet determined. "Please, I need to speak to Mr. Davis," he repeated, his tone steady despite the cold stares he received. Lisa hesitated, her eyes flicking between the letter and the old man's face. She could sense a story behind those tired eyes, but her mind remained clouded by the superficial judgment that so often accompanied her line of work. She sighed, flicking her hair over her shoulder as she reached for the intercom, her manicured nail pressing the button a bit harder than necessary. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice suddenly sweet as honey, dripping with the professional polish she reserved for those she deemed important. "There's someone here to see you. He says he knows you." A brief pause crackled over the intercom before Mr. Davis's deep, measured voice responded, "Send him in." Lisa glanced back at Samuel, her expression a mix of confusion and lingering disdain. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the frosted glass doors that led to the private office in the back. "Fine," she muttered, her tone begrudgingly polite. "You can go through." Samuel nodded in silent gratitude, his wrinkled face breaking into a faint smile as he clutched the letter tightly. As he shuffled past Lisa, the air in the store seemed to shift, a subtle yet profound change that no one fully understood just yet. As the frosted doors swung shut behind him, the remaining staff exchanged puzzled glances, their minds spinning with unspoken questions. Who was this ragged old man? And what business did he have with the owner of one of the most prestigious jewelry stores in the city? Unbeknownst to them, the answer to that question would soon reveal a past full of sacrifice, gratitude, and a promise that would forever change the lives of everyone in that room. The silent test of character. As the frosted doors closed behind Samuel, he found himself in a quieter, more refined part of the store, where the distant hum of classical music played softly in the background. The walls were lined with dark oak, and the air was tinged with a subtle scent of polished wood and aged leather. Mr. Davis sat behind a grand mahogany desk, his gray eyes sharp and assessing as he looked up from his paperwork. He had the poised demeanor of a man accustomed to success, his sharp suit a testament to his status. Samuel took a hesitant step forward, his worn-out shoes sinking into the thick, plush carpet. The warmth of the room enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cold, indifferent world he had grown accustomed to. He clutched the letter in his hand, his knuckles turning white as the memories it contained surged within him. "Please have a seat," Mr. Davis said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. His tone was polite, yet cautious, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. There was a flicker of recognition, a vague sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. Samuel eased himself into the chair, his thin frame sinking into the soft leather, a small sigh escaping his lips as his weary bones found a moment of comfort. For a moment, neither man spoke. The only sound was the distant ticking of an ornate wall clock, its steady rhythm counting down the seconds of their silent standoff. Finally, Samuel cleared his throat, his voice strained but steady. "I'm sure you're wondering why I'm here," he began, unfolding crumpled letter once more, his fingers trembling slightly as he smoothed the aged paper against his knee. Mr. Davis leaned forward, his interest piqued. There was something about the old man's demeanor, a quiet strength beneath the layers of hardship and weathered skin, that demanded respect. "Yes," he replied, his voice low but attentive. "I must admit, I am curious." Samuel looked down at the letter, his eyes skimming over familiar, faded handwriting. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he prepared to reveal the truth he had carried with him for so long. "This letter," he said, his voice growing steady with each word, "was written by your father." A sharp intake of breath escaped Mr. Davis's lips, his eyes narrowing as the words sank in. His father, a man whose legacy he had spent his entire life upholding, whose shadow he had lived in for decades. Samuel continued, his voice soft yet firm. "He once made me a promise, and I'm here to see if that promise still holds." As the weight of his words hung in the air, the polished, composed exterior of the successful businessman began to crack, revealing the sun beneath, a man suddenly faced with the ghost of his family's past. Silence enveloped the room once more, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through 1,000 fragmented memories, each one struggling to piece together the puzzle of his father's past. He hadn't heard the name Samuel in decades, yet something about this frail, weathered man before him sparked a flicker of recognition, a forgotten piece of his family story. Samuel sensed the tension, his own pulse quickening as he realized the depth of the moment. He leaned forward slightly, his old bones protesting the movement, but his resolve stronger than ever. "Your father was a good man," he continued, his voice growing stronger, more certain with each word. "He helped me when no one else would. When others turned their backs, he reached out his hand." Mr. Davis's jaw tightened, his mind flashing back to the stories his father had told him as a child. Tales of struggle, perseverance, and the value of kindness in a world often too harsh to care. He had always admired his father's strength and generosity, but this was different. This was a chapter of his father's life he had never known. Slowly, Mr. Davis straightened in his chair, his eyes locking onto Samuel's. "What did my father promise you?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with the tension of a man bracing for an uncomfortable truth. Samuel's grip on the letter tightened, his weathered fingers trembling slightly as he raised it between them. "He promised me," Samuel whispered, his voice cracking with a mix of gratitude and sorrow, "that if I ever found myself in need, his door would always be open to me." The words hung in the air like a solemn echo, the final note of a song that had played in his heart for years. Mr. Davis felt his throat tighten, the weight of his father's legacy settling heavily on his shoulders. He had built this empire, this grand store, in his father's memory, but had he truly understood the depth of the man he so admired? For the first time in a long while, Mr. Davis felt the sharp sting of humility, the cold reminder that wealth and success meant little without the compassion that had defined his father's life. He leaned back, his eyes never leaving Samuel's, and whispered, almost to himself, "I see." As the old clock on the wall continued its steady ticking, the gap between past and present slowly began to close, the weight of unspoken promises and long-forgotten debts finally coming to light. An unexpected connection. As Mr. Davis sat in stunned silence, the weight of his father's unspoken promise settled heavily in the room. The air felt thicker now, the once cozy warmth of the office turning into an almost suffocating pressure. Samuel, his frail frame still leaning slightly forward in his chair, could see the conflict playing out in the younger man's eyes, a storm of emotions swirling just beneath the polished exterior. Mr. Davis cleared his throat, struggling to regain his composure. He had spent decades building his reputation, a legacy of wealth and success. But this revelation felt like a crack in the foundation of everything he had come to believe about his family. He forced himself to meet Samuel's gaze, the old man's eyes filled with quiet, unyielding strength. "Tell me," Mr. Davis said, his voice low but steady, "how did you know my father?" Samuel let out a slow, steady breath, his weathered face softening as he allowed his mind to drift back to a time long past. He leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking slightly beneath his slight weight, and began to speak, his words carrying the weight of decades. "It was many years ago," he began, his voice tinged with the soft, trembling echoes of nostalgia. "Back when your father, Robert Davis, was still a young man trying to make a name for himself in the city. Times were tough for me back then. I had just lost my job at the factory and was struggling to make ends meet. I had no family to lean on, no safety net to catch me when I fell. I was one step away from losing everything." Mr. Davis leaned in slightly, his mind racing to the fragments of stories his father had once shared over family dinners and quiet Sunday afternoons. He had always admired his father's work ethic, his relentless drive to succeed, but this was a part of his father's life he had never truly known. "One cold winter's night," Samuel continued, his eyes growing distant as the memories played out before him, "I found myself shivering on a park bench, my stomach empty, my pride shattered. I had nothing left, not even hope. That's when your father found me. He was walking home from his shop, the same store you now run, though it was much smaller back then." Mr. Davis felt his pulse quicken. He could almost picture it. His father, a young man with fire in his heart and a dream in his eyes, pausing in the bitter cold to speak with a broken, desperate stranger. "He sat down beside me," Samuel said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, the years of isolation and hardship melting away in the warmth of the memory. "He didn't judge me. He didn't look at me like I was worthless. He simply asked me my name and offered to share his dinner. It was a simple gesture, a small act of kindness, but it meant the world to me at that moment." Mr. Davis felt a tightness in his chest, a subtle but powerful ache as the pieces of the past began to fall into place. He could see his father in his mind's eye, the kind, compassionate man he had always known, extending a hand to a stranger in need. "That night," Samuel continued, his eyes growing misty as he spoke, "he took me back to his small, humble apartment. He gave me a warm meal, a place to rest, and the first of the hope I had felt in a long, long time. We sat together, talking late into the night, sharing stories of our struggles, our dreams, our fears." Mr. Davis leaned back, his mind reeling. He had always known his father as a man of integrity, a pillar of strength and compassion. But this was a side of his father he had never fully understood. "As the days turned into weeks," Samuel said, his voice cracking slightly as the emotion swelled within him, "your father didn't just give me food and shelter. He gave me something far more valuable, a second chance. He offered me a job in his store, trusted me when no one else would. He believed in me when I couldn't even believe in myself." Mr. Davis felt his throat tighten, his eyes stinging with a sharp, unexpected heat of tears. He had spent his life chasing success, building an empire in his father's name. But had he ever truly understood the man behind the legend? "And when I finally got back on my feet," Samuel continued, his voice trembling with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, "I promised him that if the day ever came when I found myself in need again, I would return, not as a beggar, but as a friend. And he promised me that his door would always be open." The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on the room like the final note of a long-forgotten song. Mr. Davis closed his eyes for a moment, his mind awash with memories of his father, the strong, loving, compassionate man who had built not just a business, but a legacy of kindness and generosity. When he opened his eyes again, he met Samuel's gaze, the old man's eyes shining with the quiet dignity of a life lived with purpose, a life forever changed by a single act of kindness. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Davis felt his heart swell with a deep, unshakable pride, not just for the empire he had built, but for the man who had inspired it all. The heartfelt revelation. As the memories of his father's quiet acts of kindness hung in the air, Mr. Davis felt a profound shift in his heart. It was as if the weight of years, The relentless pursuit of success and the carefully polished exterior he had built for himself were suddenly stripped away, revealing the son who had once idolized his father, the man who had inspired him to dream big and work tirelessly. Samuel sat across from him, his frail frame hunched over, eyes glistening with a mixture of gratitude and lingering sorrow. He had revealed the truth of his connection to the Davis family, a truth that had struck Mr. Davis to his core. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing as the pieces of his father's legacy slowly fell into place. After a moment of heavy silence, Mr. Davis spoke, his voice soft yet steady, tinged with the deep, resonant echoes of a son coming to terms with his father's true nature. "I never knew," he admitted, his eyes locking onto Samuel's. "I never knew my father had done so much for you." Samuel managed a small, tired smile, the lines around his eyes deepening as he allowed himself to remember the man who had once been his lifeline in a time of desperate need. "He never sought recognition," Samuel replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "He didn't do it for praise or for profit. He did it because he believed in the simple, powerful idea that we should help each other, that a little kindness, given freely, can change a life." Mr. Davis felt his chest tighten, a lump forming in his throat as he listened to Samuel's words. He had spent his life trying to live up to his father's example, to build on the foundation of success his father had laid, but he had missed something fundamental. The simple, profound humanity that had defined his father's life. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together, his polished cufflinks catching the soft, golden light of the office. "Tell me more," he urged, his voice tinged with a desperate need to understand, to grasp the full scope of his father's legacy. Samuel's eyes grew distant, his gaze settling on a spot just beyond Mr. Davis's shoulder, as if he were looking back through time itself. "Your father was a dreamer," he said, his voice soft but steady. "He had big ambitions, but he never lost sight of the people around him. He saw potential in everyone, even in a broken, desperate man like me." Mr. Davis felt a sharp pang of recognition. He had always admired his father's ability to inspire those around him, to lift them up and push them forward. But hearing it from someone whose life had been forever changed by that same generosity made it all the more real. "He taught me how to stand tall again," Samuel continued, his voice trembling slightly as the memories surged within him. "He gave me a job when no one else would. He trusted me, believed in me, and in doing so, he gave me my dignity back." Mr. Davis felt his pulse quicken, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. He had always known his father as a strong, determined man, a visionary who had built an empire from nothing. But this side of his father, the quiet, compassionate side, was something he had never fully appreciated. As Samuel's words sank in, Mr. Davis felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to live up to his father's legacy, not just in business, but in the way he treated those around him. He had spent years building walls, protecting his hard-earned success, but perhaps it was time to tear down those walls, to reconnect with the simple, profound values his father had lived by. With a deep, steadying breath, Mr. Davis leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Samuel's, his voice trembling with newfound resolve. "I want to honor my father's memory," he said, his voice filled with the quiet intensity of a man rediscovering his purpose. "Not just with this business, but with my actions, my choices. I want to make him proud." Samuel's face broke into a broad, genuine smile, his eyes shining with the deep, unspoken connection that had just been forged between the two men. He reached across the desk, his frail, trembling hand extended in a gesture of friendship, of mutual respect. Mr. Davis reached out, his strong, steady hand meeting Samuel's in a firm, heartfelt grip. In that moment, the years of separation, of unspoken promises and forgotten debts, melted away, leaving only the profound, unbreakable bond of shared humanity. As they sat together, hands clasped tightly, eyes locked in mutual understanding, Mr. Davis felt a deep, unshakable peace settle over him, a sense of purpose and clarity that he had not felt in years. He had found not just a connection to his father's past, but a path forward, a path that would honor his father's memory, not just in the glittering displays of diamonds and gold, but in the quiet, everyday acts of kindness that had defined his father's life. And in that quiet, powerful moment, the son truly understood his father's legacy for the first time. A tearful realization, as the warmth of their handshake slowly faded. Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair, his mind still reeling from the flood of memories Samuel had just stirred. The office, once a place of calculated deals and polished professionalism, now felt like a sacred space, a place where the echoes of his father's kindness still lingered, woven into the very fabric of the room. Samuel, his frail figure framed by the soft glow of the desk lamp, gently pulled his hand back, his eyes never leaving Mr. Davis's face. For a long, silent moment, they simply looked at each other, one man clinging to the past, the other struggling to come to terms with it. Finally, Samuel broke the silence, his voice soft but clear, each word carrying the weight of years. "I never forgot your father's promise," he said, his fingers tightening around the edges of his tattered coat. "Even when the years grew long and the world grew cold, I held on to it, not just as a lifeline, but as a reminder that kindness, true kindness, never truly dies." Mr. Davis felt a sharp, sudden sting in his chest, the unmistakable ache of a heart rediscovering its capacity for compassion. He had spent so many years focusing on the numbers, the profits, the polished exterior of his business, that he had forgotten the simple, profound truth his father had always lived by, that people, not profits, were the true measure of success. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished surface of the desk, his eyes fixed on Samuel's weathered face. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and regret. "Why wait so long to remind me of my father's promise?" Samuel hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the window, where the late afternoon sunlight filtered through frosted glass, casting long, golden shadows across the floor. He took a deep, steadying breath before replying. "Because I didn't want to be a burden," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly with the weight of unspoken fears. "Your father gave me a second chance, and I wanted to honor that gift by standing on my own 2 feet. I didn't want to come here as a beggar, but as a friend." Mr. Davis felt his throat tighten, the sharp, bitter taste of regret rising within him. He had been so focused on building his empire, on living up to the legend of his father, that he had forgotten the very principles that had made his father a legend in the first place. A sudden, powerful urge surged within him, the need to right the wrongs of the past, to honor his father's memory not just with words, but with actions. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing as he considered the possibilities. "Samuel," he said, his voice steady but laced with newfound determination, "I want to do more than just honor my father's promise. I want to help you, truly help you, the way he would have." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, his frail shoulders trembling with the unexpected weight of Mr. Davis's words. "But I don't want charity," he whispered, his voice tinged with a mix of fear and pride. "I've spent my life fighting for every scrap, every moment of dignity. I don't want to lose that." Mr. Davis leaned forward, his eyes shining with a fierce, unyielding resolve of a man rediscovering his purpose. "It's not charity," he said firmly, his voice ringing with the same quiet strength his father had once possessed. "It's a second chance, the same second chance my father once gave you." For a long, breathless moment, neither man spoke. The room seemed to pulse with the silent, shared heartbeat of 2 souls bound by a promise, a legacy of kindness that transcended time and circumstance. Finally, Samuel nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, his frail hands clutched tightly in his lap. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world." Mr. Davis felt his own eyes grow damp, the sharp, burning heat of tears threatening to spill over as he reached across the desk once more, his strong, steady hand clasping Samuel's in a gesture of solidarity, of unspoken understanding. In that moment, the past and present converged, the threads of a long-forgotten promise weaving themselves into a new, unbreakable bond. Mr. Davis, the son of a great, compassionate man, had finally found his way back to the simple, powerful truth his father had always known, that kindness, given freely and without expectation, was the greatest gift one could offer. As they sat together, their hands clasped tightly, their eyes locked in mutual understanding, the world outside the frosted glass windows continued to turn, the sun slowly sinking below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the polished floors. And in that quiet, powerful moment, both men felt a sense of peace, of purpose, that they had not known in years, a peace that would carry them forward, hand in hand, into whatever the future might hold.